As I considered Galatians 5:24 through 26, I decided to create two separate responses, beginning with verse 24. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. This verse brought to mind Luke 11:24-26, which warns, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house swept clean and put in order. Then it goes and takes 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. And the final condition of that person is worse than the first. So I know that I can't just use self-control and stop doing whatever has been tempting me. The key to crucifying my fleshly passions and desires lies in replacing them with more of Jesus. I must intentionally pursue a closer walk with the Spirit to successfully turn from whatever the enemy is enticing me to dabble in. So I chose this silhouette of a woman doing just that for my journaling. I adjusted the size of the image on my laptop and then placed a sheet of copy paper right over my screen to trace an outline of it softly with a pen. Then I used my light box to backlight it under the page. This one's an ABC light box, and it cost me less than $15 online. It's such a great shortcut. It allowed me to place the girl wherever I wanted on the page. I elected to do the letters freehand and referred to the tracing prompt for the layout. Since I didn't measure and pencil in guidelines before starting, I'm trying to keep my spacing and letter size consistent and my lines straight. I'm adding some character to the letters by just emphasizing that bottom portion of each letter, making them thicker than the rest. I'm also curling the ends of certain letters. I love adding little touches like that and varying the letter styles and trying out new ones. You can see that I skipped a page in my journal also for this entry. I did that because I was using that light box and it wasn't working well through the page to the left because there's an entry on the back side of it. Some people skip a page between each entry just so they don't have to deal with warp pages or bleed through or issues like that. You can also use that blank page to write out a response to the verse that you're illustrating. Great way to add to your journaling. I looked through my journal to see what color I haven't used for a while for backgrounds. I usually choose lighter colors that won't overshadow the verse or the image, but this time both of them will be plenty of dark, so I'm going to go with a red background. I used my biggest brush to try and cover it quickly and avoid unwanted lines where that paint dries faster than I can spread it. But I ended up not mixing enough paint and water to keep it flowing. So you'll be able to see brush strokes where I had to try and come up with enough moisture to cover the page before everything really dried up. I'm going to paint the woman with a dark, almost black indigo color, and that'll pretty much cover up the red, so I don't have to worry about painting around that part of the illustration. It helps to use the biggest possible brush for each project, but I'm realizing that this one is very full and hard to control around the details. I'm lifting the book, and that allows me to lay the paint down and then use gravity to just gently help pull it down as I direct it where I want it to go. I wanted to disguise areas where I had painted outside of the line, so when it dried, I used a red colored pencil for outlining it. In hindsight, I probably should have used my black pen, but decided I could live with it the way it is, and maybe the red outline added an interesting aspect to it. You can see how watercoloring over the letters dulled them a little bit, so I'm going over them and adding to them, darkening them. This also allows me to make some minor changes or corrections towards spacing and letter forms. When I pause to read the verse and reflect on it again, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. I created an application for this verse in my journaling, but as I read it again, the word crucified is standing out. As a follower of Christ, I have crucified the flesh and I now belong to Him. Adding a cross, I'm thinking, would point to the act of crucifying fleshly passions and desires because I belong to Christ Jesus, who was crucified for my sins. So that's exactly what I decided to do. I penciled it in first because I didn't have a lot of wiggle room for mistakes since I've already painted there, and colored it in with a black colored pencil, and that completed the first of my 2 journaling projects. The last 2 verses of our study were, "Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking, and envying each other." Well, earlier I had journaled verse 16 that tells us that walking by the Spirit, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. So with this project, I'm going to focus on the warning about becoming conceited, provoking, and envying. I thought social media is a good platform for that, and it didn't take long to come up with an idea of a selfie to go with that whole social media theme. Specifically, a selfie with a selfie stick as a symbol for this warning. I have nothing against them. I think they're pretty fun for goofy photos, but they could also come in very handy if you become conceited or want to provoke someone or have probably led to a lot of envy. I'm going to add these verses to my Fruit of the Spirit mini journal. I sketched the woman and verse in pencil first, then went over the verse in pen. This time I made the letters tall and skinny and bounced them slightly instead of making them all line up perfectly at the bottom. I used colored pencils and various shades of brown for the hair, and I put more pressure as I was drawing the lines that I wanted to stand out rather than just blend in with the paint. When I add the water, I can also use my paintbrush to push the color towards areas that I want to make darker than others. And since my watercolor pencils behave more like colored pencils until I activate them with water, I'm still able to use the eraser to lighten them and sometimes even erase them when I want to. When I begin painting the different colors, I'll need to let one color dry, one area dry before painting the one next to it, unless I'm okay with it all blending together. The watercolor pencils are just like the watercolor paints. Once they're wet and they travel to wherever the moisture is. If the adjacent area is only a little damp, you can still get bleeding. I think it ends up looking like my lipstick bleeding into the small lines around my lips. Oh, but you probably can't identify with that aging issue. Anyway, you can see how the colors change once water is added, and my pencils are generic ones, so I don't use them very much and haven't really invested in a high quality set of them. I'm sure you could get better and richer colors, better blending and everything if you loved working with watercolor pencils by buying a better set than I have. So here we have it. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking, and envying each other. 2 journaling ideas to wrap up our study together.